guys. Thank you for having me here. So for today's session, what I want to cover is just give you an idea of what GitLab can do for your DevSecOps platform. And in terms of, I want to really take the time to sort of explain how our approach to DevSecOps is in the market, and hopefully it sort of convinces you to see what value add we can bring in, right? Before we begin, I just wanted to understand a quick shout out. Who in the audience today has been using GitLab? Can they raise their hands? Who are aware of GitLab today? Okay. Anyone considering using GitLab? Okay, that's silence, no problem. So let's start. Okay. So what I want to talk to you about today is a little bit about value stream management, and then I also want to talk about how we differentiate ourselves in the market in comparison to point solutions that are there, and then the impact of AI on the entire DevSecOps workflow, right? And then I also want to finish it off with the future roadmap for our product, and that sort of will give you an idea as well on where we are heading in terms of a product and how we are applying AI moving forward. Right. So in 2023, we did a survey. So in 2023, we did a survey about 5,000 DevSecOps professionals, and 65% of the developers said that they are either using artificial intelligence today or they are planning to use over the next couple of years, right? And I'm struggling with the... Is there a lag in the... Okay. So 62% of them have shifted left from a security perspective. They've already shifted their security from a shift right approach to a shift left approach, where it essentially means they've moved security closer to their developers, right? 85% of the security professionals have the same budget that they had last year, or probably lesser even this year, right? And 77% of the CISOs we surveyed said that point solutions sort of really create silos in their DevSecOps environment, and they sort of make it vulnerabilities to slip in easier into their DevSecOps environment. So one of the key questions then becomes that how do you measure the flow from ideation to production, and overall, how do you optimize your DevSecOps practice, right? One of the important questions that arises is how do you identify those inefficiencies, and how do you then fix that? So typically when you have point solutions today, when you have multiple solutions in your DevSecOps environment, it becomes very hard to measure, visualize, and then actually remediate or fix those issues in your pipeline. So before I go further, I also wanted to explain the audience here the concept of a value stream. So a value stream is an end-to-end set of activities that collectively creates some sort of output, right? Now, if you take an example of, say, the next slide, please, of a cafe shop, right? The end output is the coffee, okay? So before you get to the coffee, you ground your beans, you brew your coffee, you steam your milk, and then you decorate it, and then finally the coffee lands in your hand. So there is a whole bunch of steps that are followed before you get the coffee. So if you apply the same principle to DevSecOps, there are multiple stages involved. So you have the planning phase, you have the development phase, then you have a testing phase that comes in, then a whole bunch of security checks happen before the review and approval, and then finally before the code is pushed into production, right? So typically these value streams can be hard to measure because simply with the number of applications that you have, each development team has their own testing needs, they have their own set of tools that they use. So depending on the kind of applications, the amount of applications you have, the number of systems that you end up having within your environment can be significant. And that makes the measurement of your overall DevSecOps pipeline quite difficult. Right. So quite simply put, if you can't describe what you're doing today as a value stream, you don't know what you're doing. Right? The next slide, please. So from a measurement, the question, okay, I've sort of spoken about the importance of value stream, but the most obvious question that you might ask is how do I then measure it? One way of measuring is it through something called DORA metrics. Now, DORA metrics is something that came out of the DORA Research Labs, which was eventually then acquired by Google, and that this sort of really provides a very valuable framework on how you can measure your DevSecOps software supply chain in general, right, overall. So deployment frequency, lead time for changes, mean time to restores, and change failure rates, these are the industry-defined terms in which you can measure your DevSecOps software supply chain pipeline today. And typically, when it comes to adoption of some of these metrics, right? So one of the most common problems that you run into when you start to modernize your software supply chain is that you realize that your planning teams, your development teams, your security teams, all of them are operating in silos. The workflows that some of these teams have are inherently disjointed. They are working in parallel. So there is no unified workflow that connects from your planning team, your development team, to your operations teams and your security teams. None of them are combined in a unified workflow. All of them have parallel workflows running amongst each other. And because these are parallel workflows, there's a lot of context that is missing when work gets passed on from one team to another. Okay? Next slide, please. So from a GitLab's perspective, what we've tried to do is we've tried to bring all of these 4 different personas onto that unified workflow that I was just talking about earlier. So the planning, the development, security, and operations, all of the things, all of the constructs that are needed for those 4 personas to do their job are all integrated within a single platform. Now, when you integrate all of those 4 personas into a single platform, the most obvious benefit that you get is there is less context switching that happens between the overall workflow. Say, for example, if your planning team is creating an issue and that issue is getting picked up by a developer, the developer already knows the context, right? The developer can then, do the security testing all within his environment and then pass that work to your security teams. Now, the security team can see what this particular code, which project is this particular code associated with, and which issue subsequently that is related to. So the entire context is there within the platform. Right? So this is just an extension of the slide that I just presented earlier. Right? So we bring in those 4 personas, one single user interface, and this ends up creating that unified data model that I was talking about. Right? And you'll see further when I'm speaking why this becomes very, very important in the context of AI. It becomes far more because we have all the data into in a single application. The application of AI becomes very, very easy for us to do. Next slide, please. From a positioning perspective in the market, Gartner has identified us as a leader in the DevOps space. And for obvious reasons, because our customers have seen the value of consolidating their existing tool chain and then bringing some of those capabilities which are redundant and then consolidating them onto GitLab. Next slide, please. So the value stream that I was just mentioning earlier and its relation with the DORA metrics. So we incorporate something called value stream management within our platform that enables executives and operators to visualize the health and identify and track the inefficiencies in the overall software supply chain. Next slide, please. Now I want to just walk you through a sample workflow of how a common DevSecOps workflow looks like and what's the difference when you move to a GitLab style workflow, right? So I'm just going to move the slides a little bit and you'll be able to see how the workflow moves from the planning stage to your source commit stage and then goes to a build and then finally all the way to deployment, right? So I'm just going to move the slides a little bit. 1, 2. So the issue creates, so it goes to a source code management, it goes into a build system, and then the artifacts get created, the rest of the pipeline runs, and then it finally goes to your security teams where they're doing all their SAST, DAST scans, and then it goes to a code review, and then if a vulnerability is found, typically what happens is your security teams are publishing those vulnerabilities on an Excel sheet and then passing that back into your development loop. Now, if you look at all these boxes, you'll realize all these 5 boxes are 5 different workflows, all running in parallel, right? There is no way to enforce any type of governance or compliance, and if it has to be done, it has to be done externally. It can't be done within your software supply chain inherently, right? So your security might end up passing a certain vulnerability back into your development teams, but the development teams might choose to say, all right, discretionary, I can fix it, but if I don't fix it as well, my application works, so I'm going to push it into production. So when that starts happening on a regular basis, you end up having low quality code into your production environments, which might eventually break at some point, right? And okay. So with the workflow with GitLab, one of the first things that we've done is we've built application security. It's native to the platform. It's not an afterthought. So typically in a common workflow, what happens is once the code is pushed into a repo, once the code exits the developer's ecosystem, the security happens later, right? So the code is merged, it's all committed, it's merged, and then the security scans, all of that takes place. But with GitLab, because AppSec is built within the platform, it's not an afterthought. So the moment the developer is writing the code, he can have the code tested with the rest of his main code that is in the repo, and before he pushes the code, he can be reasonably assured that the quality of code that he's pushing is inherently of higher quality, right? And because there is no context switching that is happening between your plan, between your development and your deployment phases, right? There is a reduced context switching in that overall environment, which actually ends up saving a lot of time. Now, if you look at the total time calculations, we typically save about, this is again, don't quote me on the numbers, but this is about 26% lesser than a common point solution workflow, right? And the bulk of the time that you end up saving is because of that reduced context switching that happens and the prep time that takes between for the code from moving from one phase to another. Okay. So the last thing that I wanted to cover is the impact of AI on DevSecOps. Now we've spoken about VSM, we've spoken about what a common workflow looks like, both from a point solutions perspective and a GitLab perspective. So now I'm going to go ahead
with DevSecOps. Now, this is typically how a common DevSecOps pipeline would look like, where you've not made any changes, you've not applied any AI, where your development teams, for assumptions, let's say they are underutilized, but they're producing a certain amount of code. Your security teams are working in tandem with your development teams and saying, all right, there is a certain number of code reviews that needs to happen. There is a certain number of checks that the security team needs to do. The utilization is all right. But the moment I start applying AI in any one of those phases, yes, I have reduced the utilization of my development team because I'm now producing more code because of AI, but the utilization of my security teams is going up because I am producing more code. But going back to the example that I showed earlier with VSM, you have to optimize not just one aspect of your software supply chain, but the entire workflow, right? And this becomes very, very difficult to do with point solutions, because when you have a point solution for one specific persona, you end up creating data islands, data silos. So if anybody's used ChatGPT before or any of the LLM models, you'd know that, getting a consistent output is itself very hard, right? Now, applying AI across multiple point systems and tying all of them together is an incredibly complex job, because you don't have inherently there are data silos and there is not enough context for the AI to apply intelligence on top of it, right? Now, with GitLab, what we do is we are applying our AI strategy is based on a per feature perspective. So we might choose to use a certain kind of LLM model for your plan phase, and we might end up using a different kind of LLM model for your development phase. So we really are not commercially tied to any LLM provider. And because we are able to apply AI throughout that entire workflow, and because we have that unified data model, the automation that is possible with AI is incredibly powerful, right? So if you take the previous slide into consideration, next slide, please. An overall AI DevSecOps powered, sorry, go back. Go back, please. Yeah. So if you look at an AI-powered DevSecOps workflow, you'll see that the utilization has reduced, but the efficiency of both your security and your development teams is in sync, right? It's not that I'm applying AI for one specific area of my software supply chain and I'm ignoring the rest. It's throughout that entire software supply chain. So again, an extension of what I just said earlier. So today, you can go back to the previous slide, please. No, the next slide. The next slide. So today we are, out of the box, we are providing AI-powered automations for things like code suggestions, code explanations. Developers can do also test generation cases using AI, and it can also do root cause analysis, right? Next, please. We have vulnerability summary as well, vulnerability resolution as well. So a very interesting feature is, if once a vulnerability is identified, the AI just doesn't identify the vulnerability, but also provides you a resolution. So we are working on workflows where it can automatically open a merge request, and that can be sent back to the developer, where he just needs to make the necessary changes and then put through the rest of the process. So all that is possible via automation because we have that unified data model. Next slide, please. Next slide. So we've recently launched the AI Transparency Center as well. This is where you can see how we are using AI today, right? We published what kind of LLM models we are using for which feature, right? How we are using. We don't use any customer data to train our LLM models or any kind of proprietary data. So all of that information and how our AI backend systems are architected. All of that is available in the AI Transparency Centers, which is open for any customer to go and view. I want to finish this off by playing a video from our product marketing team, which sort of gives you a roadmap on what you can expect over the next few months from a product direction perspective. Can you play the video, please?
Gitlab Duo Workflow, the future of AI-driven software development, a fully autonomous AI agent that proactively supports developers as they develop, deploy, and secure software. Gitlab Duo Workflow transforms the development experience, transitioning from reactive, prompt-based AI to proactive, autonomous AI that drives software development and delivery. Leveraging GitLab's unique, unified single data store, Duo Workflow connects all relevant data, projects, repos, and documentation, all guiding a developer's process without waiting for a prompt. It recommends items for the team to work on based on existing requirements, bugs, team skills, and workloads, even identifying the best developer to be assigned based on past projects. Straight from the IDE, Duo Workflow helps plan and prioritize tasks tailored to individual projects and defined organizational processes. Then, using the information requirement from a particular issue, Duo Workflow creates a draft of the initial codebase and architecture and shares it with the developer to review and edit, automating dozens of processes including security, dependency, code quality process, and compliance checks and requirements. Deployment is also streamlined. Simple, natural language-based commands trigger the deployment of code into the testing environment, creating a simplified, easy workflow from development to deployment. With Duo Workflow, the entire process of identifying and fixing vulnerabilities is automated, so the developer can proactively address security threats instead of reacting to them. With full context of your workflow, it will identify and analyze potential vulnerabilities. Even as the developer is typing, Duo Workflow detects the vulnerability and creates a remediation plan for the developer to review and validate. Duo Workflow can also use the insights and actions from a specific incident to secure other applications across the organization, all thanks to the ability to scan across a single unified data store. If other projects are susceptible to the same vulnerability, the application owner is notified and provided an available fix, improving security and compliance across the organization. Beyond automating tasks, Duo Workflow is able to select optimal deployment environments and dynamically migrate or refactor applications across different environments, cloud providers, or hybrid setups to maximize efficiency, cost, and performance. It's time for a revolution in the developer experience, one that allows developers to focus on innovative solutions, creative problem solving, and building the next big thing. The future of AI-driven software development is GitLab Duo Workflow.
That's all. Hopefully this was helpful. Thank you for your time. I want to call out a special thanks to ITG who made it possible for us to come and speak. So ITG guys, if you're out there, thank you very much for calling us. I look forward to working with you again. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Swami Ragupathi. Please stay on stage because we will give you the token appreciation from DevOpsDays Jakarta 2024 conference. Give applause once again to Mr. Swami Ragupathi, Senior Solution Architect, Channel and Alliances APAC at Gitlab. Thank you for your sharing for us, especially to Sobat IT. Smile, thank you. Baik, terima kasih banyak. Thank you. Please back to your